Welcome to CoMotion Labs Fundamentals for Startups. I'm Ashley Esteban, Associate Director of CoMotion Labs. While we wait for everyone to settle, I will make a few announcements. Fundamentals for Startups is our regular lecture series open to anyone interested in learning about entrepreneurship and building a startup. Each week, we feature experts from various fields who bring you insights and inspiration and give you the opportunity to ask questions. All sessions are recorded and archived on CoMotion's website. For our full schedule and to register for future fundamentals, please visit bit.ly/CoMotion Fundamentals. CoMotion Labs is a multi-industry incubator program hosting early-stage startups from both inside and outside the UW community. We are committed to nurturing and enabling startup success through critical infrastructure, training, mentoring, and networking. And we do this without taking any equity or IP. We operate out of 3 locations on campus, each with its own industry focus. The life science and hardware incubators, which are both located in Fluke Hall, and our technology incubator, which is based out of Startup Hall. If you're a founder looking for somewhere to thrive, we'd love to talk to you. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to mention that for next week's event, Don Shu, General Partner at Apertu Capital, will present Compose Your Slide Deck for Success. Today, Jens Molbach is here to present Building Stronger Business Models Through Trisector Innovation. Jens is the founder of New Impact, a humanity benefit nonprofit based in Seattle, Washington. New Impact is seeking to change the way the world finds opportunities and solves problems by pioneering the field of Trisector Innovation. Questions will be taken via the YouTube chat and in the event space. I'll now turn it over to Jens.
Thank you. Nice to be here, and nice to see you all, both here in the room and online. And we'll just get our slide deck. We're waiting for the slide deck to come. I'm just curious, how many people here are currently involved in a startup or want to be involved in a startup? Okay, some. How many people have no intention of ever doing a startup, but they're just curious about this? A few. Okay, so for those of you who are startup focused, this lecture is designed for you. We're going to go through frameworks and tools and whatnot that are really helpful for startups. But for those of you who are in other organizations, bigger companies, nonprofits, even governments, we think this work is equally applicable to you, although the language we use might be a little bit different. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk about how to build a stronger model using Trisector Innovation. We have an agenda we're going to go through. We're going to focus on a number of case studies. We're going to take 2 case studies in particular and go deeper, where we have a number of samples that we're just going to show you to kind of give you hints and sort of indications about how strong and how powerful these models can be. We're then going to walk through some tools that you can use as you're building your startup and strengthening your organization. We think these tools can be really helpful because in our mindsets, Trisector models are actually the strongest form of business models you create. And once you understand the power of a Trisector model, it's hard to think about not doing one. Then we're going to touch base on the promise of where this can lead and then finish up with some Q&A. So we got a lot of stuff to cover and we're going to dive in. I want to deal with this term Trisector right up front. It's a buzzword. It's actually a fairly simple idea. So let me just be exceptionally clear about what we mean. So if you think about our economy in the US or globally, it's made up of 3 sectors. We have for-profit companies that make products and services and they sell them for fees and whatnot. We call that the private sector. That's the biggest sector of the economy. We also have the public sector, which is made up of governments. That's cities, counties, states, federal governments, and they're groups that are funded by taxpayer dollars to provide public services for us. And then we have the third component of the economy called the nonprofit sector, which we refer to as the social sector. And those are the groups who are mission-oriented, who are trying to make a difference in the world, and they're not seeking a profit, nor are they funded by tax dollars, although in some cases they get grants from tax dollars. But they're a very important and often overlooked segment of the economy. And so we interact with all these sectors every day. I mean, just taking a page out of my own life today, I woke up in my house in my bed. My house was built by a private sector contractor. I then took a shower with public sector water that came from the water district. And then I went downstairs and had a cup of coffee and having another one here. And the coffee was certified fair trade by an NGO. So I hadn't even left my house yet and I was already having a Trisector day. And I'd submit that all of us are surrounded by all 3 sectors on a daily basis. So are our customers and so are the beneficiaries who benefit from the companies that we're starting. So I just want to kind of ground us in that piece. At New Impact, we are business model innovators. We think about business model innovation day in and day out, and we have a special spot in our heart for startups, which is my background. There are three things that we do. Fundamentally, we're about this mindset that we call Trisector Innovation. So similar to human-centered design or design thinking, some of you might be familiar with agile, sort of approach. Trisector Innovation is a mindset, and it's an approach to solving problems and finding opportunities. So we are both pioneering this new field and we're promoting it. We're starting to work with universities, it's being taught in classes, taught in incubators and accelerators, and there's a lot of momentum building around this sort of new field of Trisector Innovation. The second thing we do is we're tool builders. We build tools for impact and innovation so that people like you who want to do stuff in the world can figure out how to build these models more easily. And we're going to walk through some of those tools today and some of the things they're designed to do. And then lastly, we do advisory and coaching work. So we work with a variety of organizations. We love to work with startups to give them tips and coaching and ideas about how to pull this together. When we think about startups in particular, we hear a lot of common questions from innovators. And I'm guessing that some of these questions resonate for those of you who are here at CoMotion, who are either thinking about or building your own startup, and frankly, people who aren't building a startup as well. You know, how can I find customers? How can I find funding? How can I create more value? How do I build competitive advantage? How can I have more impact? We increasingly hear entrepreneurs saying, how can I unite profit and purpose in our business? So these are very common questions that we hear all the time, and we feel we have a lot of really useful answers to that. We also talk to investors, and investors who like to invest in startups, and they have a different set of questions. They think about how can they help their company scale? How do they enhance profit margins? How can they find competitive advantage? And a variety of other questions. And from my vantage point, I've asked myself all those questions myself. I've been both a startup entrepreneur and a startup investor. And when I've thought about those questions, I've had a very simple set of answers that actually answers, we think, most, if not all of those. And that's this equation. So when we think about Trisector Innovation, we think a lot about the existing resources that already exist in the world. It's really easy to think about the new money. I got to raise funds, got to get new stuff. That's great, that's important. But the reality is the balance sheet of the world is much, much, much bigger than the new money. And there are amazing resources out there. And part of Trisector Innovation is simply thinking about the resources in the private sector, the resources in the public sector, and the resources in the social sector. And then solve for models that actually leverage resources from all three. You can almost think about reaching into the private sector and grabbing a few resources, maybe a distribution system with trucks, reaching into the public sector, perhaps grabbing an open database, and reaching into the social sector for maybe a trusted set of relationships. And you can mix and match these things to make much more powerful models. An analogy I like to use is from my childhood. My parents immigrated from Denmark in 1948 and 1950 after the German occupation, and they came to the US, which they really loved. And as being good Danish parents, they taught me about Legos. So I had buckets of Legos as kids. And they weren't the kind of the modern form of Legos where it's paint by numbers, you open the box and you just put all pieces together in a certain way. They were loose pieces. And I think the analogy of buckets of Legos is very akin to the resources in a different sector. So with Trisector Innovation, you can think about reaching into the public sector resources, finding something interesting, reaching into the social sector resources, and then reaching into the private sector resources, and then blending them. Let me give you a couple of examples. And I'm going to start with the company that I built, Coinstar. Many of you might know Coinstar. There's roughly 40,000 machines throughout the US, probably more internationally right now. It was $1 billion company. But a lot of people don't know the Trisector story behind Coinstar and why I founded it, and frankly, why it scaled and why it was so successful. So if you want to go through the checklist, Coinstar has processed trillions of coins and billions of dollars, been hugely successful for its consumers, turning their loose change back into cash. But it's also been hugely effective for the US government. Coinstar has saved the Fed and the Mint billions in dollars because we effectively created the national coin recycling system, getting all these old coins back into circulation. And similarly, we worked with the nonprofit sector, people like UNICEF, and we helped them raise hundreds of millions of dollars through that. So a couple of stories, my startup story around Coinstar is I was in grad school, and I got interested in startups. I didn't have a great hall like CoMotion to help support it, so we were more on our own. But I'd taken some courses, and I was always interested in the pile of pennies that was following me around on my dresser top, and I just got curious about it. So I wrote to the Fed and I wrote to the Mint, and what I learned is they'd manufactured $15 billion worth of physical coins to supply the US economy. So that's just a lot of pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters they manufactured. I also did a lot of research hanging outside of supermarkets. Hi, I'm a grad student, do you have any coins at home? And what I learned from all that market research was roughly half of that 15 billion was sitting at home on dresser tops. So it was out of circulation. I thought, well, that's a lot. If half the coins are out of circulation, what would it mean to make it easier for people to get those coins back into circulation? But I also thought about the other half the coins that circulated, and I realized they turned over 20 times a year and created this $150 billion market. I'm like, that's a really big market that's untapped to be thinking about this. So as I was thinking about building the model, I was like, this could be quite powerful. So we launched the machines, and we thought very deliberately about the benefits to the US government and the benefits to the social sector as we built the machines. About 5 years in, we had about 5,000 machines rolled out, and we'd just done our biggest rollout in Los Angeles of a couple hundred machines. And I got back to Seattle, and I had a call, and it was from the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. And the call was like, who are you? By the way, this is what phones used to look like. They're not like, young people now do this. I still do like that. And the Fed called and they said, who are you and what are you doing? The West Coast has canceled all future penny orders. Please come to Washington, D.C. and explain yourself. It was a little bit intimidating to get the call from the Fed. We're a little company. But we went back and we explained ourselves, and they quickly fell in love with us. They were like, this is amazing. We have this system where coins are manufactured in these two facilities in Denver and Philadelphia that then get distributed to every zip code in the country, and it's a bad product. Half of them go missing. You guys are getting all this product that's been stale back into the system. You're speeding up the velocity of it. So they really liked what we were doing. They realized we could save them a bunch of money. But similarly, they were also confused. They're like, wait a second, you're not a bank. We can't regulate you. You're not a customer. You're not a supplier. What kind of relationship can we have with this little startup coin counting company in Seattle? And we're like, you don't have to do anything. The more successful we are, the more successful you are, right? We've built our model to be a win-win for you. And they really, really liked that. And in fact, they helped us expand internationally. The following year, I got a call from the Royal Mint in the UK who said, will you come over and set up Coinstar in the UK? It's a nice phone call to get. I went over there, met with them, and they're like, this is really amazing. What do you need? And we're like, well, we need the supermarkets and the armored carriers. Anyway, they set up all the meetings that week, and we rolled out 1,000 machines in 6 months. It was our fastest rollout ever. And I like to say that my private sector shareholders got the benefit of that accelerated rollout because we had a public sector benefit. Similarly, we got a call from UNICEF in New York. And UNICEF has a program called Trick or Treat for UNICEF. Kids go off with these orange boxes at Halloween and collect coins. Anybody here ever do that? No? Yes? Some people, my sister did it all the time. Anyway, there's been a long history of fundraising and charity. And they were like, hey, we have this big program, and kids go off and collect all these coins throughout the country, but we have a hard time getting the money back. Half the kids never send it back, not because they're bad kids, they just forget to do it. And the other half the kids actually send us hundreds of thousands of these little orange boxes, and we have to open them up. And we're like, no problem, just put a message on the back of the box that says, come down the Coinstar machine, dump in your coins, punch in a 4-digit code, and we would wire transfer the funds to UNICEF. So we were able to up UNICEF's fundraising dollars and cut their costs by using the technology we had in a private sector company. So it was quite powerful. I often like to say I found a $150 billion market in my pocket full of pennies. And importantly, from Coinstar, we found private sector resources that are useful for consumers, we could provide value to the social sector and value for government. And all these things were win-win relationships. One of the things I took away from Coinstar is that organizations in every sector have value. They can do stuff, so value them. They have resources, find them. Hard to find sometimes, but quite powerful. You don't have to build everything yourself. And lastly, if you can get all the parties working together, you can really leverage self-interest to scale, which is one of the reasons why Coinstar not only scaled so quickly, but the reason it's sustained to this day. So if you step out of Coinstar and you think about what can you learn from that model, which is what we've been doing at New Impact, and we've been applying it to different models, there's really three key things in our framework. One is think about your own businesses and identify what resources are already out there across the sectors. How can you repurpose them and make them useful to you and the people you're trying to benefit? And can you actually create a tri-sector strategy that makes your startup stronger? And we always encourage you to start with a human-centered approach, right? That's always the core of where we start, but how to benefit people. Conceptually, you can kind of think about it like this. Across the bottom, you see siloed resources from companies, nonprofits, and governments. You can think about the three buckets of Legos. And then think about reaching in and finding the right resources that are relevant to you. Very specific, very pragmatic resources. We're going to talk about them. And then think about how to align the self-interest so you can actually have access to that resource from that organization and then build the tri-sector model. So over the last several years, we've been applying this framework to a wide variety of companies. A second case study I'd like to mention is a company called Propel, which creates a providers app. They are one of the most successful fintech startups in the US right now, and they are focused on providing additional services to low-income people, particularly people who are on food stamps. So in the US, roughly 1 in 7 people are food insecure, which I think is just a stunning number. And the way the social safety net is designed, the Department of Agriculture has about a $70 billion or now $80 billion budget that they hand to the states, and the states then turn around and create a small debit card for people on food stamps. So 1 in 7 people have a debit card in their wallets today. They get about $200 a month, lasts them about 2 weeks, and they can go off and spend that money at the supermarket. When you check out, you might see an EBT piece on it. Propel really wanted to do something around this, and when they were doing their market research, they realized that one of the core use cases is the person on food stamps doesn't know what their balance is on their card. So they get their $200 at the beginning of the month, that's great, lasts for about a week, but then the second week they're a little bit nervous, like, do I have money on my card or not? So the insight they had is like, hey, we can create an app, really cool app, sort of Apple-like app for low-income people, and we can show them their balance so they can access the back-end database. And when I met them, I thought that was really, really interesting and really powerful. And I asked them, what else can you do with that? And they showed on the app that they could show her not only what her balance is, but also where she spends money. So I spend so much at Safeway or Albertsons or Kroger. And I was like, wait a second, that's just not balance data, that's actually transaction data. And they're like, oh, when we download the balance, which we get from this database, from the government and credit card companies, we get the last 12 months of transaction history. So I'm kind of like, time out, guys, are you telling me that you have market share data on $70 billion of spending power in the US supermarket industry? And the answer is yes. So Propel expanded their model. They adopted a tri-sector model so they could leverage that data to get more value from supermarkets and get more value for the customer. They actually get extra spending power through discounts and coupons. They actually started to expand their tri-sector model. They started having local nonprofits distribute this app. So if someone comes into a women's shelter or someone who needs help, first thing they'll be told is, hey, download this providers app. It has a wide variety of resources. And it also integrates with now a variety of other government sectors. Propel's been super successful. They've attracted top-flight venture capital. The company is growing quickly. It'll be a unicorn company, I think, here within several years. And I think they're one of the best fintech stories around, and they're using a tri-sector model. When we were working with Propel in the early days and coaching them, we encouraged them to solve the equation. We encouraged them to think about the private sector resources that they had to bring. They were the app developers, right? And also the other elements of the private sector that were relevant to the person on food stamps. We encouraged to think about social sector organizations. One of the strongest things actually was job applications on this. And then lastly, public sector. And they integrated not only with the Department of Ag, but with a variety of other public sector resources too. And what Propel was able to do was pick and choose these resources, align self-interest, right, and then create a really, really compelling app for that end user to make a strong business model. So that's how they solved their equation. So let's talk about you now a little bit. We talked about a couple of case studies, and we're going to do a little live exercise. We're not going to make it interactive at the moment, but I want you to just think about this in your head. So I started off this presentation asking you to think about, or started off this presentation sharing my tri-sector day. Wake up in bed, taking a shower, and then having my cup of coffee. By the way, the cup of coffee itself is Trisector. I mean, the container is probably built by the private sector, the water probably comes from the public sector, and the coffee, I'm assuming, is certified fair trade. So Trisector's all around. So as you're thinking about your startups, just to get your heads going, think about your own day, and then think about your beneficiaries' day. Now, your beneficiaries can be a number of people. Could be your customers, could be the end user, but there could be a number of other players who benefit from the fact that your model exists. And start to think about how they interact with the sectors and what's out there. And as you think about your beneficiaries, think about what resources they need to make your service or your product better. What do they need in their day to have that work through? And then you ask yourself, where can I find those resources? Which organizations in any sector, in a sector agnostic way, have those resources? And then ask yourself, how do I figure out a business model for myself where I can access this resource that's already been built over here and have access to it over the long haul? How do I align self-interest to make a much more sustainable model if I'm playing with a full suite of assets in society? And if you can do that and build a strong, scalable model, you can impact many, many people with this. It can have many beneficiaries. So let's talk specifically about the 3 things that you need to do to trisectorize your model. As you're going through your startup, you're hunting for resources, you're trying to answer those questions, we think this framework can be incredibly helpful to you. We're going to talk about resources, because that's something that you really need. What do people want? We're going to talk about where they come from, and then we're going to talk about how you get them. So for resources first, when we talk about resources, there are a wide variety of resources out here. This is not just sort of gap accounting what belongs on the balance sheet. Resources could be relationships that people have, trusted relationships. It could be services that are provided. It could be data sets, open data sets or closed data sets. It could be traditional assets. It could be people. And we really encourage you to step back and think broadly about what a resource might look like that is relevant to you and your customers and the other beneficiaries out there. Some of those resources might be helpful directly to your end user, right? So you can borrow something from someone else who's met and then pass it through like Propel has done. But some of those resources might just be helpful to you in just terms of building your business, right? There's lots of ways you can utilize resources. So a couple of examples, just going back to Propel for a moment. One of the stories I love here is when they were thinking about their end user, the person who was food insecure, who was already on the SNAP program. One of the things they found is that in every city across the country, there's a program called Double Up Box or Fresh Box, it has different names, where the government will give cities money to double the value of food stamp benefits if you go to a local farmer's market. The government's trying to encourage people on food stamps to buy fresh, healthy vegetables. So you can actually go with your card to a farmer's market right here in Seattle, show them your card, they'll charge you $20, but they'll give you $40 of value. That was an existing government program, not well known, fully funded, and out there for anybody to use. What Propel did when they found it is they're like, oh, we'll just download that database, put it on our app, and the next day they could actually show their users, hey, here's where you can go shop for groceries, but right next door is a farmer's market where you can get 2 extra money, right? Here's a really useful existing resource that was very easy to access. Similarly for Propel, right, that big database, the USDA, that $70 to $80 billion that gets handed out to the state, that gets administered through 3 big credit card companies. And it turns out those credit card companies had a back door that Propel could access. The companies didn't even know Propel was doing it in the beginning. They had to kind of scale up when all the traffic came through. But it was an incredibly useful resource, and Propel got super curious. How do I can get access to that data on behalf of the user? So these are just some examples of the sort of resources that are out there. Let's talk about where to find resources. Resources can be anywhere. They are literally laying around us all the time. Who has them, and how can you repurpose them to make it useful to you? I want to come back to sectors, because when people often think about sectors, they don't always, when they think about resources, they don't always think about the sectors. So I mentioned up front the types of things that are in the private sector, companies. Social sector often gets overlooked. The social sector, even though it's the smallest, has incredibly useful resources in it And I'd really encourage you and all of your for-profit startups to look closely at social sector organizations who may have resources that are useful to you. And I'll give you an example here in a slide or two. And then lastly, on the government side, right, that could be a city government, a state. I'm super interested in districts. I think districts, fire, water, are having amazing resources out there. Federally funded programs, universities. So these are the sort of organizations that are out there can actually bring resources. So we've already talked about a couple of these things. I just want to kind of highlight some and introduce a couple of other ideas. So with Coinstar, right, we had a machine that could count all these, loose coins, and they could put up on the screen, hey, you've got, $35, and we'd print out a voucher as a piece of paper. So people gave up real money for a piece of paper. So Coinstar needed access to someone who could convert a piece of paper into real money. And one of the key things the supermarkets had for us was not only locations where we could put our machines and traffic, but importantly, someone could take their voucher to the cash register and they'd get real cash back or could spend it. It was almost like a banking function. We needed that resource. In fact, just an aside, I remember when we first rolled out Coinstar, there was one morning someone came into one of the first stores and they had like $1,000 of coins. It was like 8:30 in the morning. And they went up to cash their voucher in. The store manager said, go away for an hour. We got to sell some more groceries. We don't have $1,000 in the registers to give you, which is just kind of fun. But it was a useful resource. Propel wants to provide more value to customers, right? They've got this cool thing with balance checking and extra coupons. But here was a government program that was out there, right, where they can add in double up bucks, right there, right? So who's got that resource, how to put it out there? A couple of new case studies, or 3 case studies here. There's a company in New Jersey called Mokify, and I think they're a really interesting fintech story. They're focused on enhancing credit for BIPOC communities in urban areas. A lot of these areas are underbanked, people don't have access to credit. And what Mokify was able to figure out was many of these people they're trying to serve are on the Section 8 housing program. It's a $45 billion program in the US that helps people get housing through vouchers. And what Mokify figured out was those housing vouchers, even though it wasn't someone's own money, if they still used them on time, it said something about their credit worthiness. And so they actually had a better credit score than what the agency saw. So Mokify was building an app to essentially create a lending mechanism to come into these communities, right? Super cool thing, and they're doing some wealth building and a bunch of other fintech stuff. Well, the core problem they had was, how do I find more customers? So they were actually embedded in a cohort with Newark Venture Partners, and we were there leading a few sessions, not unlike this. And they're like, well, how do we think about this Trisector thing? And we need customers. And we're like, well, who would be talking to these BIPOC communities? And the light bulbs went off very quickly, and they ended up signing a deal with the YWCA in Chicago, who was very interested in providing fintech solutions to their constituents. So here you have the YWCA having access to the right people who need Mokify's product, and Mokify with a product. So Mokify realized that the social sector could actually have the right set of resources, those customer relationships, to help them scale their business. And they've actually just done a deal with the city of Los Angeles too, which I can talk about in Q&A. The last 2 here, RentLogic, super interesting company in New York. They were very focused on trying to make sure that landlords and tenants had an equal amount of information. They were frustrated that tenants didn't have as good information as the landlord. The landlord would advertise an apartment. The apartment wasn't quite as good as they thought it would be. So they needed information and data. And it turns out they were data scientists. They went down to the city of New York, and the city of New York had gobs of data spread over all sorts of databases and services. They had building inspectors and elevator inspectors. And they were able to reach into all those databases and create an algorithm that could rate an apartment building based upon what was going on. One of our favorite stories is that with all these databases, one of them was about cockroach infestations. So in the city of New York, the city tracks cockroach infestations. And it turns out that was like one of the most predictive pieces of data in the algorithm that said this apartment building is either an A, a C, or an F. So who would have thought that a cockroach database would have ended up being so useful? But the point is, Propel didn't have to build that themselves. It had already been built and maintained and monitored. And the last one I put up here is just slightly different. It's with about FEMA and General Motors and responses. So if a natural disaster happens, right, and the cell network goes down, it turns out that General Motors has this thing called OnStar, this cool OnStar network, which they built to make restaurant reservations and transportation ideas and whatnot. But it turns out that when the cell network goes down, FEMA and first responders from like the First Cross know to run to a General Motors car because they use their entire car as an antenna to create some sort of integrated roving mesh network. And in a disaster scenario, you want a GM car because that's going to get the line out. So in this case, you have the federal government accessing a private sector resource. Okay? So we've talked about resources and we've talked about where to find them. You can find resources anywhere. Last thing we want to talk about is how to get sustained access to these resources. And we want to talk about self-interest. We really lean into self-interest a lot at New Impact. We think it's fundamental to how you build your business, no matter what sector you're working with. So you've seen this kind of diagram now a couple of times. Imagine your company in the middle. Imagine there's some other private sector resources that you want to have access to. Imagine there's some social sector resources you want to have access to. And imagine there's some public sector resources you want to have access to. You have to design a give and a get. You want those resources, but you have to fundamentally think about the self-interest of the organization that's providing them, right? And you have to do that up front. So in my experience with like the Fed and the Mint, right, I didn't call them up when I was a startup, in year one saying, hey, I'm going to create a coin counting thing and we're going to do all these cool things. We didn't talk to them. We waited 5 years for that phone call to come. But because we'd thought about what their self-interests were, when they heard about us, they fell in love with us and they accelerated us quickly, right? So it was a very informal relationship where we thought deeply through what needs to happen with those resources. Same thing with other elements of Coinstar. So as you're thinking through your own models and you start to go down this trisector path, the hardest part of the model is to get the alignment of the interests right. And I'll say a couple things here. Organizations don't have to have the same self-interest. They just have to see their own self-interest in it, right? So for UNICEF, for example, the self-interest of Coinstar was we wanted more people to come use the machines. Yes, we wanted to be helpful to UNICEF, but we needed customers. UNICEF interest was fundraising. Those weren't the same, more customers and fundraising, but they aligned, right? They spoke to each organization. Here's an example of Propel and how they were able to create the give-gets and align the self-interests out there. Supermarkets, wanted to get increased sales. So they could integrate with Propel and create discounts and coupons and leveraging all those access. It was really fascinating. They didn't have a natural market to reach the lower end of the market, and here Propel provided them opportunity. In fact, what's not up here, several other players, people like Comcast Essential and other providers, are really interested in accessing, providing more services to people. Same thing down here with the local community benefit organizations. They wanted to provide support services, and Propel wanted to get increased access to customers. Here locally at Mary's Place, when a woman checks in, they'll tell her, hey, download this provider's app. It's really helpful to you, right? It's a win for Propel. It's also a win for Mary's Place. And same thing with the Department of Ag. And one of the things I love about the Department of Ag story is when Jimmy and Jeff were building Propel, they asked me early on, like, God, we're the small company and we're starting in Pennsylvania. When do we go talk to the state? When do we talk to the USDA? And I said, wait, don't talk to them yet, right? You're too small. They're not going to pay attention to you. But think about the state agency that's administering this food program. Think about the federal agency and build Propel's model so when they hear about you, they will accelerate you, which is what they did, right? Worked out very well in Pennsylvania. And now Jimmy's on the USDA Innovation Board, and he's helping them think broadly about innovation. So just like I had a deep relationship with the Fed, Jimmy ended up with a deep relationship with USDA. All right, so those are the elements of a trisector model. We've talked about resources, sectors, where they come from, and self-interest, how to get them, and how to have them sustain over time. Now let's talk about tools that can help you. And this is the second thing we do at New Impact is tool builders. We have 6 tools. We're just going to focus on the top half of the graph today. So I'm guessing, since we're at CoMotion, many of you are going to be familiar with the Lean Startup Canvas or Strategizers or any number of canvases out there. We think canvases are great frameworks. We have built a Trisector Innovation Canvas. It is a brainstorming tool, and it's meant to integrate with the work you're already doing, right, with Lean or the business model canvas out there. It's also meant to integrate with the work you're already doing on research and doing human-centered design and all the other great disciplines that you're being taught about ways to think about this. So this canvas is an add-on or a bolt-on, and it's meant to give you maybe a little bit of a different set of glasses or a different set of lenses to help you find resources. As startups, you're hungry to find these things that's out there. So that's what's here, and it integrates with some of these other things we do. The canvas looks like this. I actually have a printout. If you go to our website, you can download a physical canvas. It's also available digitally in Miro, which is an online tool, so it's free online. All of our tools are free and accessible. And it has essentially 3 frames to it. It has the problem frame, which you're going to be familiar with. It also has a concept frame, and importantly on the right-hand side it has what we call the Trisector frame, which walks through resources, organizations, and self-interest. I encourage you to download it and play with it. We think it's super helpful, and you can see some of the call-outs here on it. Another thing you'll find in that Miro board, and actually in the PDF too, is we have a question bank. So as you're going through the canvas, if you need some prompts or some thinking and we're not around to coach you, you can go look at the question bank, and I really encourage you to spend time at the question bank. There's a lot of really good questions that we've heard from people just like yourselves that we've aggregated in here, which we think lead to better solutions. Another tool we have on the website is something we call the Trisector Equation Worksheet. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is an Excel sheet that you can download, and it's super specific. It asks you to list which organization in which sector has a resource that's targeted to which bottleneck or opportunity or something, and importantly it asks how are you going to get it. Are you going to need a super formal contract? We got to sit down and negotiate for a year to get something done so you get access to the resource? You might. Or is it going to be like me in the Fed where I could just start accessing the coin system immediately and they didn't even know about it? So you can have very different types of things. But as you're doing your research, as you're identifying these resources, finding leverage in your model out there, this is where we push you to go. When you can actually fill this sheet out, you'll know that you actually know how you want to build your business. And importantly, investors will look at these things and say, wow, I can see a scalable system here. They're going to hook up with X, Y, and Z, and here's scale, and I can see a distribution channel. We think this is a very powerful tool. It's work, but we encourage you to get into it. Another tool we have, actually we have 4 tools here. I'm guessing you guys are doing a lot of primary research and interviews and talking to a lot of people. That's fundamental to startup land. A couple of messages here. When you talk to people, even if you're not in the Trisector world yet, talk to people in government, talk to people in the nonprofit sector, and I promise you'll be surprised how many people out there in those other sectors have resources or ideas or thoughts that are relevant to what you are doing. So make sure that your lens on your research is broad enough to incorporate feedback for all 3 sectors. Often you will find stuff you'll go like, well, I didn't know that existed, and that's pretty interesting, and heck, there's a guy out here with a database that I had no idea that's out there, and I can tell a story about that in Q&A. When you're talking with them, we encourage you, we have a bunch of questions you can ask, but these are the 2 we'd ask you to ask them. We like people to think creatively, so it's the classic magic wand question, right? So if you're talking to someone in government managing an EPA database, you could say, hey, if you had a magic wand, how would you love to see this database be used? Often people in their jobs are siloed, but they got 20 other ideas that are out there. Part of your job and part of the opportunity is to release that creativity from them and listen to it, and then you can think about how to integrate it. The other question we ask is quite powerful, which is if you could control another organization and any one of their resources, what would it be? So make someone in charge of whatever company they want for the day, whether it's a private sector company, in charge of HHS, and think creatively. If you could have access to their resources, what would you do with them, right? And it's a very powerful way for people to start thinking about how to borrow and repurpose resources. Often people can't answer this when you first ask them, but they'll come back a day or 2 or 3 later and they'll go like, wow, that would be so fascinating. We did a project with Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, nonprofit, and they have a bunch of digital assets. And they're like, God, if we only had Disney's content management system, I bet they'll have a really good one. Yeah, it'd be pretty interesting. They need content management. The last tool I'm going to mention is the one we started with first. And once innovators like you kind of start to go down this Trisector path, there is one question that will dominate you, which is we're really interested, we've played with this, where do we find these resources? You're telling all these cool stories that they all make sense at the end of the day, but in the beginning you're dealing with buckets of Lego that are unorganized and they're hard to find these things. How'd you find that cool database, or how'd you find that relationship? So we have a product which is up on AWS. It is a prototype. You can access it if you email it, and it helps you find resources. And it essentially is a directory of resources in the US across the 3 sectors. And it goes through, it's been built by graduate students, and it lists which companies, which governments, and which nonprofits have which resources. And it's organized by impact area, and you can find things like databases and volunteers or case management or showers, whatever that might be. So it's sort of an ingredient, a whole bunch of ingredients, but with an organized taxonomy so you can find it. And we're excited about this. Actually, the iSchool here at the University of Washington is doing a capstone project on this very database now, trying to make it more accessible to people like you so you can use it for Trisector Innovation. And we're super excited by that. This is an example. How we have the resources tagged by different impact areas, which we can also get into. So hopefully this gives you a sense of how it all comes together, right? We have these siloed resources across the sectors. You can pick and choose, align the self-interest, and then create these really much more powerful models. I'd just like to say that these models, I think, are stronger than a standard business model. It will let you scale faster, have more impact, be more powerful, and frankly, be cheaper to build because you're in this recycling, repurposing world. A couple of things I'd love for you to take away today. This is one of my favorite slides, is I'd like you all to think about your private sector strategy. You're all going to have good strategies for your startup companies. And hopefully today you'll start to think differently about what your social sector strategy might look like. And very specifically, which nonprofits or 501c3s have resources that could be useful to you to help further your core mission. And importantly, what resources do you have that might be useful to that C3? And you can hopefully see some examples today where the social sector actually has really valuable resources for scale. And then lastly, I encourage you to think different about your public sector strategy. So many entrepreneurs say, I don't want to deal with government, they're going to slow me down, they're going to regulate me. And hopefully you've seen this as a different way of thinking about it. Government has amazing resources from the local, state, and federal level. What resources do they have that would be useful to you to help you scale your business? What resources do you have that would be useful to them, right? Think about my relationship with the Fed and how it was a win-win going on both sides. And just stepping back, just speaking to a little bit about what we think about New Impact, we love this work. We work with different universities, different accelerators, different incubators, increasingly different funds, and across different sectors. We think the world is rich in resources, and the more people that draw tri-sector models, we think we can be much smarter about solving problems at scale faster. In fact, if you step back and you think about it, in the US alone, we have over $250 trillion on our balance sheet. That's more than 10x our annual GDP. We are a country vast in resources. The world has over 500 trillion of resources. And yet we're not very good at unsiloing these resources and putting things together in different ways. We're not assembling the Lego blocks in new and creative ways in the way that I think we could. But I think if we can move that direction and more people adopt tri-sector models, I think we can actually drive progress at scale faster, which is why we're here. You think about New Impact and the work that we do as the fulcrum and the lever. We all want to see change in the world happen. We're trying to design the mindset, the tools, and the coaching to help you get there. This is the last slide. We have a lot of information on our website that you can download. You can learn more about what we do, the action, the tools, and it's right here. And I'll close it up and we can go into Q&A. Thank you all very much for listening.
So I have a question from the internet, our YouTube audience. Can you give an example of Trisector Innovation in supporting a business with a long development time, such as a new pharmaceutical?
Yes. So do I need to repeat that, or is that out there?
That one's right.
We actually did work with a Fortune 100 pharmaceutical company. I'm under an NDA, so I can't tell you the company and I can't tell you the product. But I can give you the outlines. Very long development cycles. They were working on a mental health issue, and they were working on a drug for mental health. And when they heard us talk, they were like, wow, well, we work with the VA and we work with universities, come talk to us around this. And we were able to help them think about the VA very differently, the Veterans Administration. And we asked them, hey, if you were in charge of the VA's resources and you wanted to help these people who were having mental health issues, what would you do with the VA resources? And similarly, if the VA was in charge of your big pharmaceutical company, what would you look like? So much more of a collaborative piece. The piece that was most surprising on the long-term drug development piece was the nonprofit sector. Their executives were like, nonprofit sector, we write them a check and give them a grant and they go off and they advocate. And we're like, who do you think's running the homeless shelters? Who's running the prison recidivism program? Who is on the front lines of people with mental health? Who has better lived experience, better data than you do? And they're like, oh my God, why aren't we talking to these people? So they were able to flip their mindset with this very long-term drug development to think about their customers and to think about what their customers need. And their customers don't just need the drug, they need other things from government and social sector and other companies, and to create a much more comprehensive Trisector solution. So it was hugely relevant to these long-term things. In fact, I'd say if you have a long-term process, you want the government in here because they have long-term funding. You want other people out there to help sustain. Next question.
Thank you.
So to what extent do you think that this Trisector lens is something that entrepreneurs at sort of any stage can take on versus an approach that's sort of most useful at the beginning and will guide you towards, you know, providing certain services or goods?
I think it's a great question. Do I need to repeat for the internet or did that come through? Okay. Perfect.
Just in case we don't get it.
Okay. So I started New Impact with the idea that it was going to be most useful for early stage startups, especially startups who are hungry, who are resource constrained. What we have learned, it is equally relevant to a middle stage company, private equity company, a Fortune 100 company. And frankly, we've expanded the work to work with social sector organizations, and we're increasingly working with government, especially at the federal level. So we think the approach can be useful. If you've already got a great business, you know, can you make a great business even greater, right? Because there are likely resources out there that are aligned that you don't have to build, you don't have to pay for, it can make it stronger. So I would think this is a broad framework that is useful. Today we're focused on early stage startups. We could change a few things around, but it's broadly applicable to many types of organizations.
A quick question from the internet. Will your presentation be available?
Sure.
Can you share that?
Be happy to.
Great.
Should we share that through CoMotion, or we could also put something on our website?
We can do it either way. Someone's already writing me for it, so if you
Great.
send it to me, I'll get it out there. Also, someone asked about the resource, your database resource. I know you have toolkits, but is that part of the toolkits? Is it
Yes.
open access right now?
Right. So that particular tool, that resource directory, it's called the New Impact Wiki right now. We view it very much like a Wikipedia, an open source, open data piece. It is not publicly available at the moment. We're very dedicated to being a public good, so we need some grant funding and some stuff around it. We have ideas for it to be sustainable. We hope it becomes publicly available. But in the meantime, they can go to the New Impact website, email us here. I'm here with my senior product manager, Beth Roberts, and Beth will give you access. So I don't know if Beth's not on camera right now, but
Yeah.
come on up, Beth.
Come on, talking to your mic. I guess I would say it is available, but it needs gentle care because it's a very early tool. So if you email us, we'll give you an account and get you access. It's just not robust enough to throw out there to the wide world. So
One of the things we're hopeful to do in the near term is perhaps get the state of Washington fully mapped and available in that resource, so we can all see what does every city have, counties have, so the state of Washington could actually become an innovation hub for this sort of thinking. Yeah.
Great presentation. I think one of the perceptions that one has oftentimes is that trying to work with the public sector and the social sector requires a lot of patience and takes a lot of time. So I was curious, do you have any particular tips on how to move faster or to get their buy-in, to get things to happen in a better pace?
You know, Thank you for the question and the comments. One thing is, let's start off saying, hopefully this just sounds like common sense. It is like, it's what my mom taught me, use what you have, right? Unfortunately, it's not common practice because it can be hard. So in terms of tips on working with the public sector, it depends on the nature of the relationship, right? So I started working with the public sector for 5 years before they even knew about me, right? I mean, the Fed got a call from the LA Fed that said, we're swamped with pennies, cancel all future penny orders, we don't need any more, right? So I was working with them, right, in this very, arm's length piece, like distant. And there are lots of opportunities to leverage existing government relationships without having to actually interact with them. Very quick, very easy on it. Now there's a spectrum, right there. Sometimes you got to sign a contract with them, and you have to go through a process. We just got approved after months to be a federal contractor, right? It's taken us a long time. We're going through the process with that. And so I would say, there are good people inside of government who want to work with you, and if you do need a formal relationship, their websites are getting better, their information's getting better. And I'll tell you, a misperception that I had when I started this work was the level of desire. I underestimated the level of desire and innovation inside government. And I work with tons of really innovative, interesting, dynamic people at cities, counties, states, and the federal governments. There are people as eager as you to make something happen in the world on the other side of the table. Now, there might be some roadblocks to getting there, right? And appropriately, we need some guardrails, but you can get it done. So you might want to start with the more informal relationships. You can just get going, and then sometimes you're going to end up with a very formal one. Beth, did you want to add something?
That is also where the alignment comes in, like really understanding how it's going to help them further their goals of some sort. It may not even be exactly aligned with your goal, but it might align with a different goal they have, is also incredibly powerful fuel to get some action going.
And I would say on government in particular, there's the political side of government, which is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the operational side of government. And so if you're thinking about the water district, they want to provide good, clean water to people and have it used, right? That's their self-interest. So if you can start to think about ways that further that, that could be really interesting. They also have amazing data, right? All the water districts have all this data. No one's ever aggregated it, I'm sure they'd love someone to. Other questions, comments, thoughts, reactions?
I had several, but you've answered them in the past 7 or 8 minutes. So
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the internet to respond. If there's any more questions in the room.
I have one other example I can share.
Please.
I have a friend in the audience who's particularly environmentally minded. And I was just going to share a database story that ties back to this question about government. There was this company that approached me, and they're like, we're really interested in this, and we're trying to create a biodegradable piece of oil that ships can use. And it turns out all the ships in the ocean, if you think about it, they've all got a propeller coming out the back on a shaft. And it needs lubrication, and it turns out it's a positive pressure system, so every ship that you see out there, and you can look at the public databases, is leaving a slug trail of oil behind it, something like the equivalent of 6 Exxon Valdez spillages a year, some large number. Anyway, they were really interested in obviously scaling this and having more ships shift over to this biodegradable type of propeller shaft lube. And after they'd heard a talk, they ran up to me and they said, oh my God, the EPA has this database that actually shows every ship and when they're changing the oil out, and the brand of the oil is in the EPA database, right? So all of a sudden there's market share information. And the Coast Guard has a database around enforcement about making sure that actually gets put together. So they're like, God, we can put these two things together and create this really powerful scaling mechanism for sales to go out and talk to all these ships that need to change over. So they were very excited. They're like, but similar to the question before, they're like, how do we get access to this stuff? And in particular, this EPA database. So I said, well, let's go to their website. So we go to the website and go through 35 clicks to get down to that database. And at the bottom of that database is a guy's name who maintains the database, and with an email contact. And we sent him an email, and it was 10 minutes before he responded. And he's like, thank God somebody contacts me. I spent all this time maintaining this ship propeller oil database stuff. I didn't think anybody cared, and I've been waiting for someone to use it. Thank you so much. So do not underestimate the power of who's on the other side and what they want to do. Not only the data they have, but they've got a ton of good ideas, which is why we encourage you to get out there and talk to them and unlock that. The public sector is so often overlooked, and it's just this latent, vast body of opportunity out there that just isn't valued as much as it could be.
Jens, I was thinking another question that often comes up is about how do we find resources? So we talked about one way, which is the wiki. And I think another way that's worth thinking about is when Jens was talking earlier about the spotlight interviews, that's another place. Well, while you're talking to people, you can be finding resources.
Yeah, it's a terrific way. And part of that, when you're interviewing people, listen for resources and let them talk. And part of those questions about the magic wand and if you could control another organization, another government entity or social sector, part of the point of that is to listen for what resources they really want and will be useful to them. So train your ears, train your eyes to see the world with a Trisector lens, train your ears to hear with a Trisector lens to find those resources, orgs, and then always be thinking about aligned self-interest.
We have a lot to read on your website and a lot to download, but I always like to ask, what books would you recommend either on this topic or not? What book is on your nightstand right now?
Well, the quick answer is there aren't a lot of books yet on Trisector Innovation. Beth likes to point out that it took 40 years for design thinking and human-centered design to get researched and taught. Frankly, I don't think we have 40 years for Trisector Innovation to be adopted globally. So books are coming, we're busy, but we need more. We actually have several grad students and a PhD student who's writing a dissertation on Trisector Innovation, and we have an increasing number of universities who want to teach this. So not a lot to read on that. There's lots of great business books out there. What's on my nightstand? This is a little bit non sequitur. I read How the World Really Works by Václav Smil. Am I getting his name right? And I got to say, I was kind of shocked at how little I knew based on what he wrote. So I actually bought that book for family and friends this holiday and widely distributed it. So I would go with that one. I'm also a big fan of Yuval Noah Harari's trilogy, Sapiens, just brought that, Homo Deus, and 21 Ideas for the 21st Century. That's more of a systems thinking book out there, and I find that particularly helpful. But neither of those are about Trisector Innovation.
Awesome. Well, that's it for today.
Great.
We want to thank Jens for sharing his wisdom and experience with the group, and we want to thank you all for coming here today and joining us. As a reminder, next Friday at noon, we'll be hearing from Don Shu, who will present Compose Your Slide Deck for Success. Sign up for that, and we'll see you all next week.